Okay, I will get started now. So thank you everyone for joining today from wherever you're joining from. Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning. And thank you for joining Dragon Trail Interactive and Jing Travel for today's webinar, looking at China's domestic tourism recovery and what we can learn from it overseas, both in terms of winning back the Chinese outbound market and more generally speaking, tourism in general. Researching the topic for this webinar, it's been very impressive to see the kinds of innovation and solutions that tourism brands in China have come up with over the past 5 or 6 months, and I really hope that you'll be inspired by the webinar content too. So we've got a very full agenda today. We will aim to present for about 45-50 minutes and then have time at the end for a Q&A session. So we'll start by talking briefly about China's domestic tourism recovery and what it looks like today, and then go sector by sector, talking about OTAs and travel websites, airlines, hotels, cultural institutions, destination marketing, and then offering some takeaways for overseas brands, and then moving on to Q&A. You can ask questions at any point during the webinar by using the Q&A button on your Zoom control panel, and then we will answer those questions at the end. One final piece of housekeeping is that we will be sharing a PDF of today's presentation slides, as well as a link to a recording of the webinar with everybody tomorrow. So you will have all of those resources to hand to refer back to, and please feel free to share them with any colleagues that you think might be interested but weren't able to attend the live webinar today. So for those of you who haven't heard from me before, my name is Sienna and I'm Dragon Trail Interactive's Associate Director of Communications. I focus on kind of the educational side of what we do with our monthly webinar series, the reports, articles, interviews, and other content that you'll find on the Dragon Trail website, and compiling market intelligence. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by Peter Huang from Jing Travel.
Thank you. Hi everyone. My name is Peter Huang. I am the managing editor at Jing Travel. So here at Jing Travel, we provide peer analysis and original insights on the latest news in arts, culture, tech, destination tourism, and anchor them in our expertise in China and the Chinese market. Ever since the pandemic, we've seen a rise really in new modes of audience engagement, revenue generation, and cross-platform collaborations in the broader cultural sector, both in China and overseas. And we've noticed museums and cultural attractions have responded with a wide range of digital strategies to cope with the pandemic and the recovery effort. So one of our goals at Jing Travel is also sort of to be a bridge between the digital innovative developments in Chinese arts, culture, and e-commerce, and also the cultural institutions and brands and agencies from all around the world. So if that's something that you're interested in, make sure to check our website and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. We publish white paper, case studies, and host webinars regularly. So stay tuned for more.
Thank you very much, Peter. We'll look forward to hearing from you about cultural institutions in China. So for anyone who might be attending a Dragon Trail Interactive webinar for the first time, Dragon Trail Interactive is an award-winning digital marketing agency that focuses on outbound tourism from China. The company was founded in 2009 in Beijing, and we have 3 offices in China, as well as international offices in London, where I'm based, and in Lexington, Kentucky in the US. And we work with tourism brands all around the world to help them connect to Chinese consumers and to the Chinese travel trade through digital initiatives. We work with clients on every continent except Antarctica, and with a range of industry verticals, including destinations, airlines, cruise lines, hotels, attractions, and other tourism businesses. So to start off, I wanted to talk about China's domestic tourism recovery and really what that looks like. So there's really nowhere else in the world that has seen such a full recovery of their domestic tourism market as China. But it's very important to see that this recovery, it didn't happen overnight, and it didn't just happen organically. It's been really gradual, and it's been thanks to the concerted efforts of many throughout China's travel industry. So at the end of January, just as the Chinese New Year holiday was starting, and that is one of the biggest times of year for Chinese domestic travel as well as outbound travel, just as that was about to start, the country went into lockdown. Basically all travel stopped, and by February, the average hotel occupancy in China was 7.4%. Then we didn't start to see any recovery until the beginning of April. That was China's first national holiday following Chinese New Year. That was a 3-day weekend for Qingming Festival at the beginning of April. And at that time, some people did start to travel again, but traveler numbers were down 60% year on year, and tourism revenue was down by 80% year on year. The next month, things were a little bit better. There was another national holiday for 5 days for China's Labor Day at the beginning of May. And the numbers at that point were better than they were projected to be, but traveler numbers were still down by around 40%, and revenue was down by around 60%. But we have seen sustained recovery throughout the summer, and right now, actually, flight bookings and hotel occupancy is basically back to normal in China. And actually, some hotels in China made more money in the summer of 2020 than they did in the summer of 2019. And looking forward, 2 weeks from today, China will be about to go on holiday for 8 days for a National Day and Mid-Autumn Festival holiday, and there's expected to be a surge in domestic travel then. We can see that already from high-speed train tickets that sold out as soon as they went on sale at the beginning of September. Airlines have added thousands of extra flights in China to meet increased demand. So I guess the question is, how do we go from 7% hotel occupancy in February to a fully recovered market by now, with some hotels even making more money than they did last year? And I think there are 2 answers to that question, or 2 key reasons. And the first is that China has done a really good job controlling the virus. And this has been through strict lockdown and quarantine measures, through really extensive testing, through really effective contact tracing programs. And without all of that, this tourism recovery would not be possible. But the other key reason for the recovery of tourism has been a huge effort on behalf of so many people in China's travel industry. And that is what we'll be talking about today in the webinar. So one of the keys to China's tourism recovery has been industry-wide cooperation, but OTAs and travel websites have been some of the first players to really trial the methods that have turned out to work the best in terms of getting people spending and traveling again. And of these OTAs, the leader has been Ctrip, or the Trip.com group. This is China's largest OTA, and it's also Asia's largest OTA. And prior to COVID-19, their chairman, James Liang, was quite a kind of behind-the-scenes character. And since March, he started doing a weekly live streaming session where he sells hotel rooms and other kinds of travel products. And that has been such a hit. As you can see from the posters from the live streaming sessions here, he dresses up in different costumes for the live streams, and those costumes seem to be getting sillier and sillier. The one last week, he dressed up like an elephant, as you can see on the right. And that's really been a hit with viewers. It's got him a big cult following, and gotten a lot of exposure for these live streams. And Ctrip was not the very first travel-related brand in China to start live streaming. We did see some live streaming from hotels during the lockdown period, but I think that when Ctrip started live streaming in March, we can see this as a watershed moment for China's travel industry that really kicked off this huge trend of tourism-related live streaming. And it's the first instance where we can see after the coronavirus crisis started, where a travel brand in China really started to make money again. So his first live stream made 10 million renminbi. The second live stream made 20 million renminbi, and the third one made 27 million renminbi. So this is really generating sales. And in this way, Ctrip and James Liang, they showed their willingness to take risks, to think outside the box, to be an industry leader, and this injected much needed cash flow into the whole travel industry, and it's really paid off. They haven't just done live streaming. They have also worked with KOLs, key opinion leaders in China, to publish aspirational travel-related content on their channels, as you can see from the picture here of the woman in the red dress. They have also worked with many different travel blogs and kind of travel media that focus specifically on deals that are active on Chinese social media. You can see an example in the image here in the middle where it's talking about a Ctrip hotel deal, and then at the bottom there is a QR code that links to Ctrip's WeChat mini program. So somebody can be reading about that promotion on a travel blog that they follow on Ctrip, then they can click on the QR code and go straight to Ctrip's mini program to book that deal without ever leaving Ctrip. They've also worked with a number of travel blogs and things like that to promote the live streaming sessions as well and get people to start watching those. And they've also rolled out lots of deals that kind of link up with that are timely deals. So one example is at the very beginning of the recovery period, they had an offer where medical staff got one free hotel night. And then as self-driving was taking off at the beginning of the recovery period as a form of transport for travel, they had a special self-driving promotion with discounted car rentals. There are many other OTAs in China too that have taken quite similar actions. So on the left here is a live stream from Fliggy, which is Alibaba's travel marketplace. They have been working together with Marriott consistently on live streaming and other kinds of travel promotions. In the middle, two pictures, you can see a poster and a promotional post by OTA Tunio for their live streaming with their chairman. And then on the right, you can see an article that's quite similar to the one we saw on the last slide from Ctrip. This is a promotion on a travel deals blog on WeChat, and below the information about the hotel promotion, you again can scan a QR code that goes straight to Chunar's mini program where you can buy that hotel deal. So OTAs, what they have been doing is really to drive sales. And on the flip side of that, for live streaming, we have Chinese travel website Mafengwo, and they have really pushed the idea of travel live streaming as a form of long-term marketing, inspirational content, and entertainment. Although now they are, you can see little pop-ups where you can find out more information about the trip and buy products. So they are starting to monetize that as well. Mafengwo launched their live streaming platform in March, and it has seen exponential growth since then. And you can find live streams from all over the world, as well as many domestically in China. And all the examples on the screen here of domestic live streams. Mafengwo, their live streaming platform, is particularly popular with millennials, with about half of their viewers born between 1985 and 1995. And some of the most popular domestic live streams that they have done so far have included live streams at theme parks, so the Happy Valley theme park chain in China, as well as Shanghai Disneyland, a trip to see the pandas in Chengdu, and live streams from Tibetan parts of the country. After OTAs, I think airlines maybe have done the most to kind of promote new ways of sales and to push that resumption of travel in China. Airlines, like basically all tourism sectors in China, have also gotten on this live streaming trend. Spring Airlines did their first live stream hosted by their chairman in April, and they made $1 million US from the first live stream, and then they again started to do weekly live streaming events. So during their live streams, it's very sales focused. They offer special deals on flights, on hotels, and other products. They also have kind of entertainment sections, as you can see from the picture here, where they're doing like a Tai Chi or a Qigong demonstration. And they do a lot of giveaways during the live streams to make sure that people keep watching. But one of the biggest trends for airlines this year has been these all-you-can-fly deals. Those started in July, and now I think about 10 airlines in China have different all-you-can-fly deals. And these are all, they're all a little bit different from each other, and they all have different restrictions. So for instance, China Eastern has a deal that is only for weekdays, and you have to fly either before 8 a.m. or after 8 p.m. They also have another deal that is only for weekends. Meanwhile, China Southern is offering unlimited flights from the end of August to the beginning of January for 3,699 renminbi, but you can only fly the same route 2 times. You have to book 5 days in advance, and there are a limited number of tickets available every day. So I guess the big question with these all-you-can-fly deals is, how is this financially viable for the airlines? And I guess the answer to that is that although it seems impossible for them to really be making a lot of money off of these deals, the airlines were cash strapped in July, and they needed an injection of money. And with these deals, the passengers pay for everything up front. So it kind of brings in a lot of capital to the airlines early on that then allows them to have some breathing room while things start to recover further. The way the all-you-can-fly deals have been promoted, it has included live streaming as well as collaborations with travel blogs and KOLs, and some collaborations with credit cards and bank cards as well. So CITIC Bank has worked together with both China Eastern as well as Air China. Hotels, let me just check. With hotels, we can see a lot of the same methods as OTAs and airlines, with some very creative promotions as well. If you want to learn a lot more about what hotels did at the peak of the crisis, so during the lockdown period, we actually did a whole webinar on this topic, and the video of that is on the Dragon Trail website, and there's also an article on this topic. So I won't go into it in too much detail here, but just to summarize, during the lockdown period, hotels use digital media to communicate with their clients and clarify things about hotel closures and refunds. They also published messages of support. They gave back to the local community by hosting medical workers in Hubei province, especially Wuhan. They developed new revenue sources such as food delivery, and they promoted their kind of heightened hygiene protocols in the hotels. And they also engaged people online through short video and live streaming content, particularly of cooking classes, as well as exercise classes and even online parties. So that was during February and into the first half of March. And then starting from mid-March, when there were just the beginnings of signs of recovery in China, Qingming Festival were on the horizon, that's when hotels started to push discounts and promotions very aggressively. And some of the hotels that have been kind of at the forefront of this and most aggressive have been Club Med and the Atlantis Sanya in Hainan province. And you can see posts that they did on Chinese like hotel travel promotion blogs on Ctrip on the center and the left-hand pictures here. The Atlantis Sanya was also the place that partnered with Ctrip for Ctrip's first ever live stream. But it hasn't just been kind of these big name international hotels that have been promoting big discounts and things too. It's been really everyone in the hotel industry. So an example here on the right is from the Songtan hotel group that is a boutique hotel in the western part of China. And they promoted some of their deals together with Dragon Trail's new travel promotion media brand, Great Travel on WeChat. So hotels have had quite a lot of creative promotions, and some of them are a little bit like what we've seen from the airlines. So as I said, Atlantis Sanya has been particularly aggressive, I think, at kind of pushing people to get them traveling again and bring them back to the properties. And one of the things they did in April to really motivate people is that they said if you booked a certain number of nights in the hotel, they would pay for your plane ticket from selected Chinese cities. Then Marriott has a creative eat your room rate where you get F&B credit depending on the price of your room. Accor, very much like the airlines, this August they launched an all-you-can-stay weekend deal, and there are 3 price brackets for that, ranging from 3,999 renminbi to 9,999, depending on which properties you want to stay at. And altogether, they have 80 properties around the country that are participating in that deal. In terms of promotion, I've already talked about many hotels working together with Ctrip and Marriott live streaming with Flicky. On the right here is a Weibo post from Kempinski. They have been doing some promotion together with Ctrip, but they've also been doing their own live streaming on Weibo, and that has been very popular on Weibo over the past couple of weeks we've seen. In the center is a post from a couple of Chinese travel KOLs who are helping Club Med to sell some hotel vouchers. And then on the left is an example of a promotion that I really liked a lot for Huaju Hotels, which is a mid-range Chinese brand. And they work together with a Chinese travel KOL and videographer named Jia Paul. And he has this really cool look. He has long hair and he dresses in kind of urban street style. But one of the things he does is regularly is he travels together with his parents, and he makes really funny and cute, endearing videos of those trips. And so this summer he traveled to Chengdu together with his mother, and they stayed in a Huaju hotel, and he made a short video about their experience and shared that with his more than 2 million Weibo followers, as well as his followers on Douyin. So with all of that, I think you have a clear idea of what travel businesses in China have done to really promote sales. And on that note, to change the pace a little bit, I will turn over to Peter.
All right, thank you, Sienna. I think definitely the things that's been happening in the culture sphere in China have been equally exciting. And I do want to mention, you know, in some ways, the recovery effort really started from the day when the museums were closed in China, because you know, they figured out that when they reach out to audiences and engage with them, sometimes you don't necessarily have to be, you know, physically engaged with them. A lot of times, a lot of these initiatives could happen online. And so back in March, we published a special report that sort of looked at some of these strategies used by Chinese culture institutions during the pandemic. And there are a couple of things that sort of really stood out to us from the very beginning. And I think above all, we were particularly impressed, not just by how quickly museums in China responded, but also the way of which they responded. So from virtual tours to curator-led live streams, from online charity art auctions to mini program campaigns, we've seen new modes of engagement just happening everywhere. And in some ways, they are redefining the cultural institutions in China. So at the time, we offered 3 key takeaways based on our studies. So next slides, please. So we talked about how Chinese museums engage audiences through online exhibitions, virtual reality, gamification, and more. We've seen, particularly in the case of Palace Museum, where they launch a panorama view of the museum grounds, where people are able to immerse themselves and really walk in the museum as they explore different exhibitions and objects. We also looked at how museums in China leveraged cross-industry partnerships to expand their reach into fields such as e-commerce and to provide them with new revenue opportunities and deepen their impact. We also noticed how Chinese museums are sort of re-examining their purpose and part of their roles as social institutions, while at the same time expressing their identity and personality to build audience and join forces as part of a larger cultural relief effort, particularly through live streaming. So innovation, collaboration, and this idea of doubling down on cultural live streaming, these are three key takeaways we picked up from numerous examples we studied back then. While drafting the report, one of the questions that we asked ourselves, as well as many industry professionals, is this: do you think the strategies used by Chinese cultural institutions would stay when the pandemic is over? So with Western museums started to close doors in the weeks followed in March, we started to hear more and more discussions and debates about online and offline strategies, revenue opportunities, and the larger role of art, culture, and tech in the cultural sector. And all of the things that we talked about earlier in the Chinese museum context in that report, all of a sudden become relevant and in some ways universal, despite some of the broader differences existed between Chinese museums and overseas cultural institutions. And on the other hand, we also noticed that Western museums are seemingly not deterred by the lack of outbound tourists, but they continue to create new ways to reach Chinese audiences and deliver content and products through live streaming, virtual exhibitions, e-commerce opportunities, and more. So that is why I feel like the examples and lessons that I'm sharing with you today, whether you are coming from a Western museum background or if you're an agency or brand who is hoping to engage Chinese audiences, I think these lessons could be valuable to you. Now, most of the Chinese museums have reopened since March. So that's about 2 months after the first lockdown. And since then, we've seen many new initiatives and new campaigns that's happening across both the private museums and the state museums. And since then, some of them have even gone through a second round of close down in June, when a brief outbreak sort of shut the doors of many museums and other entertainments in certain areas in Beijing. So museums in China have since sort of rolled out a wide range of methods, right? So from the Culture and Tourism Green Code, which is essentially an app that allows museums to assess visitors' health and streamline bookings, to a mask wearing mandate when entering the museum grounds. They've also experimented different ticketing promotional packages. The packages that Sienna mentioned about extending a free night stay to the frontline healthcare workers, they also have similar sort of ticketing discounts for healthcare workers as well for some of the museums. And on the performing arts front, we started to see an online and offline strategies sort of start happening, and which allows them to reopen safely while still delivering an optimal viewing experience to their audiences. So next, I will take you through some of the examples and maybe offer you some thoughts on why we think they are important. So the first point I want to mention is collaborations. As I mentioned earlier, one of the major things that sort of emerged from the Chinese museum's early reaction to the pandemic is collaboration, right? And I think the way the museums approach their content, their exhibitions, their audience, and even the way they present their the stories of the museums have really changed moving forward because of these experiences that they have during the pandemic. And often these collaborations, they're either happening within the museums. So you're seeing 7 museums or 8 museums, 9 museums team up in a joint effort, or you're seeing, well, at the same time, you're seeing these museums working with outside platforms to deliver a campaign. So one example that I want to mention here is, less than a month entering the pandemic, the How Our Museum hosted an online charity auction with cross-industry partners, including a famous foundation, multiple art galleries, media partners, and online platforms. And more than 400,000 people turned in to the eTail Live auction, and the whole thing grows more than 14 million RMB. And another art auction that sort of goes on around the same time and also leverages partners, but they went from a slightly different route. So Beijing Council Auction International and an independent bookstore in Beijing named One Way Street, they promoted an online charity auction through celebrity endorsement, right? So they reached out to Yao Chen, who has 83 million followers on Weibo, and promoted their initiative. And the hashtags generated more than 6 million shares on Weibo because of the repost and the celebrity sort of power in this. And 8 museums later joined Taobao livestream for virtual tours I think in February. Is probably just another example of how museums could gain wider attention and traction through cross-industry collaborations, between media organizations, celebrities, KOLs, KOL endorsements, broader cultural institutions, and online platforms. So again, these early day examples have in some ways really offered new ideas for us now when thinking about marketing strategies in the culture sector post-COVID in China. And next, I want to talk a little bit about the live streaming. So one of the important ways of collaboration comes in form of cultural live streaming. So think about it essentially as a way for museums to directly engage and interact with audiences, right? So I will be talking about its sales capabilities a little bit later, but here I want to really emphasize sort of this one-on-one opportunity that it creates for viewers, right? With the artist, with the curator, with the director of the museum, where they really, they're only like a string apart, and then be able to have that intimate and personal sort of connection, and also with the museum's objects. So one example is back in February, UCCA teamed up with a short video app platform, Kuaishou, to live stream an online concert called Voluntary Garden, and featured a well-known Japanese composer, Ruichi Sakamoto. They have since, so the museum have since produced a second season in April. Both concerts are huge success. Together, they generated close to 5 million viewers, 5 million views. And I remember even one of my friends reached out to me and say, he's a huge fan of Ruichi, and he mentions that just being able to watch him and having that kind of close connection, right? And then in such a special and difficult moment is really a lifetime memory for him. And then more recently, we've seen sort of this live streaming kind of methods have been adopted by more museums, sort of as as a more common approach, not one that's necessarily interfered with their offline engagement, but really uses as a reinforcement of their identity, reinforcement of their message. So more recently, we see Palace Museum has decided to do 8 hours live streaming to celebrate its 600 years, the 600 years history of Forbidden City. And they have curators, they have deputy director and people who work in sort of behind the scene of the exhibitions to come in and talk about this a very special moment for the Palace Museum. But of course, the use of live streaming is not limited in the museum world since the pandemic and also during the post-COVID in China. So one of the things that we're starting to see is a lot of the performing arts organizations are also adopting sort of the live streaming approach. A good example here is the Misa Festival in July. So Misa, or Music in the Air, is an annual music festival hosted by Shanghai Symphony Orchestra. So due to the pandemic, the festival was hosted in a slightly different way this year. And so while they strictly following the health and safety regulations and limit the attendance to 30% capacity, and also with shorter programming and no intermission, they also partner with Bilibili and Kandian to live stream the entire programs and sold viewers exclusive coupons and packages through its WeChat mini program. And so I think this is a good segue into talking about revenue and e-commerce opportunities, because one of the biggest challenges I think for most of the museums during the pandemic is to think about how they could survive without visitors. So now this might be a slightly different conversation because I think the funding model of Chinese museums are, different from the ones that overseas museums use. However, I think some of their efforts are still worth noting. So if you look at the e-commerce market in the cultural sector in China, one of the first things that you will notice is its size has grown tremendously in the past 10 years. So take Palace Museum, for example. From setting up its first online store on Taobao in 2010, it took only 7 years to achieve a cultural product sale of 1.5 billion Chinese yuan, right? So that is more than 200 million US dollars a year in 2017. And since then, the online sales volume of its cultural products has tripled. And it has 6 online stores now across various e-commerce platforms. So we talked about live streaming being a good way, a great way to deliver contents for cultural institutions, but it is also an effective way to push cultural products. Think about what is more effective, right, than having the director of the museum or the curator behind the exhibition to introduce a product, a cultural product that is relevant to the story and the mission of the museum to you, right? And for instance, on the International Museum Day this year, 9 Chinese museum directors joined Taobao live streaming, directly selling their museum cultural products, drawing more than 7 million viewers in just less than 2 hours. I do want to mention that behind all of this, there is a large push from both the private and the public sector sectors in China to energize its cultural sector. For instance, Tmall, a regular partner of many cultural institutions, both in China and overseas, they announced their new Cultural and Creative Industries 2.0 initiative back in 2019. Its grand plan through this initiative was to enable 100 museums worldwide to open stores on Tmall in 3 years and to help them to undertake transboundary cooperation with 10,000 brands and to connect them with 1 billion consumers. So this has not stopped. And as Sienna mentioned, many of these initiatives that you're seeing, these things didn't happen overnight, right? And in some ways, I think the pandemic in China really pushes both the museums, the cultural sector, and the platforms to really think about even deeper, right, about the possibilities of future audience development in online, offline strategies. So as mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, there are cultural and systematic differences between Chinese museums and overseas cultural institutions. So some of their lessons can be applied directly in a different setting. However, I think whether you are directly engaging the Chinese market or are overseas agencies who are waiting for Chinese tourists to come back, my hope is that these inspirations that they serve and the direction that they're pointing, right, such as working with partners outside of your institutions, be creative when it comes to engaging audience and think digitally how the digital tools could help you, and also learn about and understand the larger trends that sort of dictates the field's future in the next 3 to 5 years. I think these things could be, equally valuable, and to not just to Chinese museums, Western museums, but then also to agencies and brands who are thinking about Chinese audiences. And so with this, I'm giving it back to Sienna, and I'm more than happy to answer your questions. Oh yeah, and then the slides that you're seeing I'll just very quickly add on one point. The other trend that you're really seeing, as I mentioned, is Western museums sort of tapping into the Chinese market. And in some ways, it's really interesting that you're seeing the pandemic has really not deterred them. So what you're seeing here is, Fleetly, the travel brand under Alibaba, has its own live streaming platform, and they team up with British Museum and other Western museums to deliver the content and also the cultural product that they're hoping to sell directly to Chinese audiences. So again, this is one trend that what we're looking at, what Chinese museums are doing, this is what Chinese platforms are doing, and this is what, in some ways, Chinese audiences are looking for. So just something to keep in mind as we wrapping up this section.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think it's very interesting to see how much Chinese museums have pushed e-commerce very successfully as a way to generate revenue over the past few years, and the way that Western museums are starting to really tap into this as well. So one last area to talk about is destination marketing. And this is an area where we can also see a lot of creativity and a lot of cooperation. And the first example that I want to talk about is Gcheng district in Beijing. So Gcheng district is in the center of Beijing, and it is home to famous landmarks such as the Forbidden City and the Temple of Heaven. And this spring, they launched a new campaign called Gugong Yidong. So translating directly from Chinese, that means east of the Forbidden City, but the English name of the campaign is the Heart of Beijing. And this campaign started in April and has been ongoing since then. They started with live streaming from Gcheng district. They also did more sales promotions by having a special promotional page on Ctrip that just featured Gcheng district, and they brought together 40 different Gcheng tourism related businesses to be featured on that page. They also are running an art and design competition with 100 different Chinese universities. You can see a poster promoting that on the screen here. They hosted 10 KOLs for a fam trip, and they're currently in the midst of running a short video competition. So this has been a long-term promotion, kind of starting when things were still pretty locked down and leading out of that. And it promotes Zhongcheng District as a creative, aesthetic, and east meets west, old meets new kind of destination. So another destination is Suzhou. Suzhou is a small city near to Shanghai. It's famous for its gardens and its canals. And their local government worked with 53 different attractions in Suzhou to offer half-price admission for a few months to kind of bring people back to these attractions. And the local government also worked together with the OTA Tongcheng to give away 50,000 tourism gift packages to people who lived outside of Suzhou. So these gift packages included local transportation, local specialties like the cookies that you can see on the screenshot on the right, a choice of tickets to 7 different gardens, and a choice of tickets to 2 different live performances, as well as a buy one get one free offer on canal river cruises. So those were given out in late April, and they were valid through the end of August. So that really promoted people to come to Suzhou all throughout the spring and summer. And at the same time, hotels in Suzhou were launching their own promotions. So all of these things together made it a great way to go visit Suzhou for much less than you would pay normally, hoping to motivate people to start traveling again. And then the final place I wanted to talk about is the coastal city of Qingdao. And their Ministry of Culture and Tourism launched a campaign that we can see is really targeting young people in China. And young people, especially those, the generation born in the 1990s, has really been behind this recovery of tourism. And so this campaign, it tied into a tourism trend in China called Daca, which is especially popular for young people. And Daca is a checklist style, very social media oriented way of traveling, where you have to do a certain number of things, check them off, take the picture when you're there to show that you've done it. So the Qingdao Ministry of Culture and Tourism launched an H5 page or site online where you could make your own profile, and then they identified 30 different must-visit attractions or restaurants, as well as must-have experiences. So these range from collecting seashells on the beach, to going on a romantic bike ride, to visiting the historic shopping center. And on the H5 page, if you checked off the things you had done in Qingdao, then those badges got added to your profile, as you can see on the yellow screenshot here. And the Qingdao Tourism Board, they also produced a music video, and there's a link to see that on YouTube here that will be included in the slides that will be shared with you tomorrow. And the video starts with a woman waking up on the beach wearing a face mask, and then she gets up, she takes off her mask, and suddenly she's in the heart of Qingdao, and her friends are there. They start to take pictures and dance and pose in front of these must-visit attractions. And then the video ends with sound bites from local people in Qingdao inviting visitors to visit their city. So the whole aesthetic is like really fun and young, and it's all part of this campaign to target those young travelers. So what can you do with all of this information? I think there are definitely some takeaways looking at tourism more broadly speaking, but definitely some very obvious takeaways in terms of winning back Chinese outbound tourists when outbound travel does start up again. And that is what I will be kind of focusing on here. So first, obviously, there's live streaming. You have heard Peter and I talk about live streaming many times during this presentation, but this really has been the digital trend of the year in China for tourism marketing. And it's something that a lot of overseas brands have already started to do. So on the left here is the search results on Ma Fenghuo's live streaming platform just for Denmark alone. Many different tourism boards around the world, more and more actually, are doing live streaming, a lot of collaborations with Weibo. So next you can see a Weibo post promoting the Nagasaki Tourism Board's live streaming that they were doing last month. Steinway Piano Brand has live streamed a concert from Germany, and then the V&A Museum was on Weibo recently promoting the fact that they're the first overseas museum to be doing live streaming with the platform Kuaishou that Peter mentioned earlier. So I think live streaming is, I see that we have a question about that, and it's something we can get to more in the Q&A, but it's something that can be used in general for kind of just general marketing and inspiration, but it is something that can be tied directly to e-commerce. So for some live streams from tourism boards, it's really just giving you like a tour of the city. But then when we talk about some of the live streams from museums, or certainly the live streams from airlines or OTAs, that is more like kind of like a TV shopping channel with the OTAs and airlines. They're really pushing big discounts and like call now and you can get this discount. It's like QVC, but for travel. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do live streaming depending on what your goals are for that. Another thing that you can do already is working with Chinese OTAs. So even starting in June, Chinese OTAs have started pushing outbound travel again. So we can see from the poster here where James Leon, I think, is dressed in a South Korean women's costume. He was selling hotel rooms in South Korea. He's also promoted hotel nights in Singapore and Japan and Thailand, even in Dubai. Tunio was working with the Tourism Authority of Thailand back in June. So this might seem really premature. I mean, there really isn't outbound travel coming from China yet, but I think we have to think back to when these OTAs started live streaming domestically in March. There wasn't any travel happening then either. And they took a leap of faith and it really paid off. And so I think they're not wasting any time in trying to make those sales for overseas tourism too, which will come back at some point. And then another thing you can do now also is influencer marketing. We've already seen Chinese KOLs and tourism blogs pushing kind of overseas destinations and brands. So I said before that Club Med is doing a lot of promotions, and those promotions, collaborations with Chinese travel blogs on social media have not just been for their domestic properties, but have also mentioned their properties all around Asia. So people start to be thinking about those in their first outbound trips. And when outbound travel from China does start up again, I think I would strongly recommend working with Chinese KOLs on a fam trip very quickly to promote consumer confidence and really show people what things are like in your destination. And one of the easiest and probably like cheapest ways to do that too is to find Chinese KOLs who are in your destination, because there are Chinese travel KOLs living all over the world. An example here is a woman whose username is Serena in New York. So she does travel the world, but she lives in New York. And these kinds of KOLs, they're not already in the destination, but I think that they can speak with a lot of authority about why it's safe to visit your destination again and what life is really like there, and kind of help to pull people back to that destination. And then finally, this is really thinking about the tourism market in general, but we've seen from the Chinese market, there have been really a lot of creative promotions to get people traveling again. And I think when you're thinking about your own domestic market, as well as the Chinese outbound market, or really anybody, it's good to think of some creative promotions to get people used to doing things that they've stopped doing during lockdown, like buying coffee or going to restaurants or staying in hotels. And this is a good way to kick things off again. So that's all we have to present today. But before we move on to Q&A, I want to very quickly tell you about a couple of upcoming events and additional resources. So if you want to learn a lot more about tourism recovery in China, I would strongly recommend attending one of 2 sessions of next week's Beijing Culture and Tourism Online Strategic Forum. This is an online event that's going on next Tuesday and Wednesday, and it should be at times of day that will suit every single time zone. And it brings together tourism experts from all around the world. So there are a lot from Beijing. You'll hear a lot about what's happening in Beijing now. There's a speaker from the Dongcheng District Ministry of Culture and Tourism, so somebody who's behind that Heart of Beijing campaign that we saw earlier in today's presentation. There's someone from the Beijing Olympic Games Organizing Committee, someone from Dashing Airport, and many others from Beijing. But there are international speakers as well. So I think it's very relevant for knowing what's happening in Beijing, but it also addresses some questions that we're facing as a global tourism industry, like how can the MICE sector recover? How do you get young people traveling again? Bigger questions like that. So registration is free, and you can get to it through the link on the screen here, which will be included in the slides sent to you tomorrow. And then finally, Dragon Trail's next webinar coming out in October will be focusing on sustainable tourism. And once outbound travel from China starts up again, how do we make sure that this kind of travel is more sustainable than it was before? So we're very excited to have 3 guest speakers for that, from World Animal Protection China, from the global, let me just check the, from trip.com, and also from the Global Sustainable Tourism Council will be joining us. So registration is open for that already on the event section of the Dragon Trail website, and through the link here. And for lots more information on live streaming, tourism recovery, and our upcoming new Chinese consumer sentiment report, visit the Dragon Trail website, and you can also follow us on social media, and there is lots more information as well as reports to download on the Jing Travel website as well. So thank you so much everyone for your attention. Thank you very much, Peter, and we are now ready for Q&A, so please do send in your questions using the Q&A button.